Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll just give it a couple of minutes for people to arrive, but great to see some people already. Hello. Great. Thank you so much for joining today, everyone. Hello, my name is Vish, and we at Cambry are hosting this webinar on AI for climate risk and how you can best enable yourself to do climate risk assessments using AI. So Cambry, as an organization, we've been using AI for sustainability analysis for the last few years now. We've been using it for multiple purposes, one of which is climate risk analysis. So we've been doing this since 2023, and we've learned a lot through doing this over the last few years. So what we're trying to do in this session is just share a little bit of experience, insight, and get some conversation going about how it is best, how you can best enable yourself using AI. So this webinar came about because a couple of weeks ago was London Climate Action Week, and we hosted a session, a workshop just like this, and we were very happy to be oversubscribed. There were many people who could not make it, and we felt quite sorry about that. So we decided to host this webinar as well. So let me set out the objective for the session. I'll introduce myself and my colleagues, and then I'll go through the plan for the day, how we're planning to go about doing it. So to start with the introductions, hello. As I said, my name is Vish. I'm an associate director at Cambry, and I lead a lot of our climate risk work across pension funds, asset managers, and individual corporates. And as I mentioned at the top, Cambry's area of expertise is using AI to best enable us to do this. I'm joined by my colleagues Alakan and Joe, who are both on our AI engineering team, and so we'll speak to some of the technical details around what we will be talking about today. And to
Hi
sum up
everyone.
the
Sorry,
AI
Rich.
account. Yep.
Yeah.
And go on, Joe, as well. You say hi too.
No. Yeah.
Great. So yeah, the objective for today is we have quite a range of people from what we could see in the signups. We have quite a range of backgrounds. We have quite a range of use cases. So what we're trying to do today is set out some ideas for how AI could enable your workflow. We have a couple of practical use cases that we're going to chat about. And then we want you to leave with a sense of knowing what is possible and how to get started and what to avoid when you're doing that. So those are our three objectives for the session. We would love if you could stop us along the way. We have the ability to unmute people. If you have a question, please raise your hand. There's a Q&A box, or you can put something to the chat, and we will try to be as responsive as we can to make sure that we're addressing the questions that are most relevant and pertinent to the group. But that is the plan. So yeah, so in meeting that objective, that threefold objective, so you know where to get started, you know what to think about, and you know what not to do. Essentially, what we're going to do is first start with a technical introduction. So we're going to define some key terms that we will all be using as we go through, make sure we're all working from solid grounds. We're then going to go straight into a couple of practical applications so you can see how we actually use this. And we're going to do two case studies, one looking at how you codify your expertise. So when you need to do something multiple times, how can you best create that effect? And then a second one talking about AI agents for physical risk analysis and some interesting ways to use technology now. And then lastly, we're going to zoom back out and we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, what to keep in mind, what to do, what not to do as you go about and exploring and starting to use AI for your own use cases. Great. I think what I'm going to do, Alejandro, did I miss anything in the introduction or anything you guys would add? Great, amazing. If not, what I may do in classic webinar style is I would love if people could use the raise hand function, as I have a couple of questions just to get us started and to get the juices flowing. So if I share my screen, I'm just looking for nods so people can see that on the screen. Great, perfect. So our
Yeah.
first question if you could raise your hand. Have you used AI in your workflow this week? Raise your hand if yes. Great. Oh, wow. Yep. Quite a few. Amazing. And then from there, could you keep it raised if you would trust the output enough to put in front of the board, leadership, whoever your managers are, with your name on it? Would you keep it raised? I am seeing I'm seeing a significant drop in the names, which is fascinating. So hopefully, what I would like for the end of this session is you have a little bit more of the direction of travel to get to a point where you could trust that. Great. So what we're going to do now, as I said, is I'm going to hand over to Alakhan to take us through a technical introduction. So we're setting the baseline. Please do use the chat function, use the Q&A function to let us know if there's anything that is unclear throughout. All right, over to you, Alakhan.
Cool. Thanks, Vish. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you virtually, I guess. And yeah, like Vish said, just wanted to start off so everyone is starting on the same baseline on the key terminology. And this might sound really trivial, but on a day-to-day basis, engaging with like people of different like technical abilities, essentially, like I keep seeing that people mess up the terminology and use the terms interchangeably, even even though they're not really. So starting off with like the biggest and the top layer is the AI, artificial intelligence. And it's not something that came out in 2023. And it's something that has been around for a long time. All of the financial forecasting, your Netflix movie recommendations, and like your Siri, Face ID on your iPhones, things like that, everything is under this umbrella terminology of AI. Whereas generative AI is a subtype that is essentially using the same systems but to generate new content like new text, new images, using some sort of a prompt or in general based on the previous training data. And the thing that had a really big explosion, like in general, generative AI is the large language models, and it's something that like came out as a big product in 2023 as ChatGPT. And when we're talking about LLMs, we mean a specific model, like a Google Gemini 3.1 Pro or a Claude Opus 4.9 and things like that. And agentic AI is something of a new term, but I think people find it really confusing between like the difference between an agentic AI and between in general LLMs. And agentic AI is essentially a system that has the LLM at its heart, and the LLM there is acting as a decision maker, so that the system can actually work autonomously in like sort of a loop until it achieves the objective that was set. For like it can consist of like multiple agents and things like that. And Joe is going to talk in a bit more detail on that. But I think one of the reasons people really confuse what is agentic these days and what is not is that, I mean, if you go to the next slide, that there has been this really big shift in terms of what the big providers like ChatGPT, well, like OpenAI and Anthropic and Gemini, in terms of what they provide now to the people. Because as when they came out, they were essentially this interface on how to interact with the large language models, with the LLMs. And this is all you could do there. You could chat, you could ask it to write you a letter in like a Shakespeare style. But nowadays, what they have built is a lot of tools on top of the models as well. Like you can use it to do the web search, and you can do it to process documents and things like that. And so now, essentially, they are providing agentic systems to users. However, I think people don't quite realize that, but if you want to do it via code, essentially via APIs, essentially like being able to call the model and embed it in your other like systems and software, that all of this tooling around the agents is not provided via the API. So like if, because I hear this, like people are like, oh, okay, if I can do this on ChatGPT, then I can go and ask my like essentially team of programmers to do the same thing, but just at a bigger scale. And which is not quite true. All of the other tooling that like the web search and things like that, you need to be able to enable it either by writing your own code and feeding it to the model, or nowadays there are so many different providers of tools that support agents. I mean, I have gone in a bit more depth than I probably should have here, but yeah, just want to stop here and reflect if there are any maybe questions and anything like that for now, because it is a
Yeah, let's take a
fairly
second there.
technical.
Yes. I feel like there is a lot there in terms of difference. So if I play back to you what I understood from that, basically there is a difference. AI can mean quite a lot. Um, AI generally has been around for a long time. What is potentially newer is generative AI, and then within that, even newer is this idea of agents. And another thing I took away from what you said was this idea of tooling. So you've got a chat interface, which is your chat GPT that most people should be fairly aware of. But the one you're trying to do things maybe at bigger scales, trying to get consistency what you're doing, a key part of that infrastructure is the tools, and that can get quite technical. Is that right? Did I sum that up?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's perfect.
Amazing.
Perfect summary.
Let's keep paused
Yeah.
for a little second to see if there's any questions. We'll give people 30 seconds maybe just to reflect, think about what we said, let us know, and then we'll move on.
I guess that was fairly clear. So
yeah. Seems good.
You can.
I'll bring the slides back up.
Yeah.
Over to this one.
Yep. So, like I said, like we're going to cover. I think this really depicts the journey of what we're trying to talk you through today. But essentially, is this an idea of like enabling your work with AI and like how to work with AI efficiently? And we really like this graphic that depicts like the different kind of like intelligence, like the human intelligence and the AI intelligence are really not the same, like because AI has superhuman abilities in some areas. Like it is super good these days at coding, for example, because coding is the perfect environment for these models where there are strict rules, it's clear, you can always actually test whether like the thing that you wrote is working or not. Whereas writing something genuinely novel and like be applying some sort of specific human judgment and like or like emotional and things like that is really like AI is so bad at it that it's incomparable. So I think this idea that is like AI intelligence is so jagged and that like I don't know if you can like yeah you probably can't see my mouse, but essentially on this third graph of like the circle and the AI intelligence jagged, all those empty spaces on the circle, these are the spaces where you need to like essentially you need to be doing the work and let AI do the work where it really excels. And like the things that AI can do really well is do this repeatable task. For example, like doing all the boring research that that gets offhanded to interns that get bored and then they get lazy and they miss stuff and things like that. Like it's this repeatable task and the idea of scaling the analysis and scaling the actually the work. So basically work with AI efficiently. And I think like Vish and Joe are now going to talk through a bit more of the actual practical examples of how one goes about doing that.
Amazing. Thanks, Alakan. So yeah, to play that back again to make sure I've understood, there's things that are better suited for human intelligence. There are tasks that are better suited for AI intelligence. And part of the work and part of the skill here is knowing when to use what kind of intelligence to then get to an area where you can do everything superb, essentially, if that's the idea of doing the best job. And in terms of what AI is really good for, it would be stuff like this over here. So it'd be large scale data collection, repeatable tasks. And so ones where you have clearly defined rules about what good looks like in order for then deploy it at scale. And I think a metaphor, your metaphor of the intern is quite good, quite useful, because you have interns who are very intelligent, very diligent, but need framing. need direction, need to know which way to go and what a good answer looks like. And I think working with AI is in many ways very similar. You've got the most dedicated agent who works intern who works all night long, but they need to know which direction to go, and that is part of the job in framing that. And so yeah, I think a couple of case studies that we'll go through will ground this a little bit to show you how we think about that. But again, I'll pause for just a second to see if there's any questions, comments, concerns at this point before we move on to our first case study.
Yeah, like you could either raise a hand or use the Q&A. Like I don't know if everyone knows how to do that, but hopefully have the ability to actually create something in those Q&A spots. But
yeah, we definitely know the raise hand works. So if we will let people stop us if there's anything that needs explaining. So I think we'll start with our first case study. And we want to start with a bit of discussion of, well, what are we trying to do in terms of climate risk analysis? And so this first case study is going to be talking about this idea of green capex and knowing what counts as green capex. And to start at first principles, why would we want to do this? There are several reasons. So when we ran this at London Climate Action Week a couple of weeks ago, we had a whole discussion around, there was a room of investors and corporates thinking about, why would you need to know if you're a sustainability team or an investor, why would you need to know? And a key theme that came about was, well, the transition seems to be happening in different places to different extents, with fragmentation, with rollback in some way, but you are seeing that movement is happening and that there is considerable capital being targeted towards transitioning. And that in practice is green capex. So there's a variety of reasons as an investor, as a corporate, you would need to know what counts as green capex. And so the question we had for the group, and interested if anyone has any thoughts here, is if you were assessing a company's green capex investments, how would you do it? I'll see if there's a hand, but I expect their name may not be. Great. So how I would do it, and how I did do it pre-AI, was a whole lot of Googling. Essentially, a whole lot of reading an annual report and trying to say, Control F solar panels and see if that comes up, or really just Control F green, see what happens, look at the financial statements, see what I could figure out. And it was quite difficult. But then, how would you do it for 1,000 companies? So I could do it for maybe one, and I could maybe get a robust answer for one company, but then doing that at scale then became a problem, right? Because with the Control F, you get tired, you don't really know what you're looking for, you're missing quite a lot. And so this is a kind of problem that AI can be really, really helpful for. The problem is doing it at scale. And so I'm aware there's quite a lot on this slide, but no one panic. We'll go through it section by section, and it should all hopefully become clear. So the question at the top, the question we're interested in, is Tesco investing in green capex? And we may need to know this for a number of reasons. As I said, for example, there's the net zero investment framework, which a lot of investors use to measure the alignment of their portfolio. And you're thinking about, how aligned am I? And one of the requirements, one of the questions you need to think about per this framework is green capex investments. So let's take that we want to look at Tesco. We want to know if there's green capex. And then what we found in this example is this quote. And the question I want you to think about as I'm reading it and after, does this count? Would you say that this is green capex? So the quote is, we continue to identify capital expenditure that specifically supports delivery of our scope 1 and 2 climate transition, captured within our total group reported capital expenditure, and is consistent with external guidance. That's a quote. Can I have hands up again if people are willing? Hands up if you think that this counts as green capex. I've got a few yeses. People are coming through. Right. Not insignificant portion of people are saying, yes, it does count as green capex. Can you note though, it doesn't say green capex anywhere. That's not a thing. So if I had done it the way I used to do it, and I just controlled F green, wouldn't have found this. This wouldn't have been an insight that I was going for, right? And so The question is, how do we capture this kind of stuff? So a meaningful proportion would say, oh, Simon, is that a question still, or is that your hand still raised from before? If it's if it's not a question, you can put it back down. Amazing. Yeah. So yeah, the idea is green capex, we wouldn't have caught it before, but we want to capture this. And so the question is, how do we use AI to say this? So we want to say, all right, we want to use AI, we want to capture this stuff. It's the kind of stuff that large language models would be very good for because they are able to understand context. But how do you do it? And this is where we come to this section of the slide, which is saying, well, there's two ways you could instruct AI. If you're thinking about the intern that Alakhan mentioned, there are two sets of instructions you could give them. So with the same source document, being this document that had this quote, you could have a literal match, which is saying capital allocation only uses the phrase, it's only green capex where they use the phrase green capex. You want a really restrictive rule. And the reason you may want to do that, say, is if you're trying to align with EU taxonomy and you want to really look for the terms that are being used there. You want to have a really restrictive view. So it's not necessarily worse to do it. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Or you could do what we call a vetted equivalence list. So count clearly equivalent low carbon investment. And so the people who raised their hands earlier, when we said this was green capex, we're probably reacting to, well, it's for our scope 1 and 2 climate transition. So that is green by nature because that's what we're saying. And so what we're doing mentally there is taking in what do we mean by green capex outside of the words, and then saying, it's bigger than that, just those words, and I can recognize that this is the same sort of thing as that. And that is expertise, and that is experience, and that is largely human intelligence so far. Being able to say, well, this means the same thing, even though it's different words. And so what we're trying to do with AI is codify that. So say I were trying to get my definition of green capex, I think this counts. I then need to say, when I'm using AI, how do I get through? And I want this to be a tick, so then I need to define my list. I need to say we're going for a vetted equivalence list. But then a question becomes, what counts for the vetted equivalence? But before I get there, I'm going to pause again for 30 seconds. Said quite a lot there. I want to see if there's reflections or comments from the group. Alakhan, Joe, if there's anything I've missed as well. And please put your hand up if there's anything.
I think it is worth spending a little bit of time on the idea of sort of codifying instinct and things that we take for granted as analysts. We might have some embedded idea of what green capex is, whether it's from, university, whatever. You have things in your brain and even in your subconscious that you don't know are there. AI has none of this. It has no context. It doesn't know whether you're going to ask about the weather or quantum physics, right? So you have to tell it, this is who you are. This is what you're trying to do. This is what a good answer looks like. This is what a bad answer looks like. You have to really spell it out for it. But once you've done that, you can operate at scale. I think that's my takeaway from that slide. I think you covered it.
Great. And to your point, I think we really need to get specific, and there's no dumb instruction when it comes to AI. I think when people were saying at the top, I wouldn't trust this in front of my board, my follow-up question is, well, how did you use AI? What was your process with it? What did you do? I am just seeing a question in the chat. Oh yeah, this is a great question. So the question I'll just read out for the group, and definitely not a dumb question. Could I ask how coding the documents here using AI differs from coding documents using qualitative coding software? So this is the kind of software that I also use during my time in academia, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about. The idea there, and in the logic is quite similar. So the idea when you're coding using this qualitative coding software is to go through a document, tag it, tag connections, tag linkages, tag, oh, well, this document speaks to the same argument as that document, and it's trying to pull out those key themes. You're trying to do exactly the same thing, actually. You're the same process, the same logic of, well, what I need to extract similar themes from different things. You're just using a different tool now. So instead of using that qualitative coding software, you're using an AI tool to help you do it. And when we say an AI tool, that's sometimes a little bit vague. So you could use this. There are ways, if you're doing one, you could just use the chat interface. You could use something like Claude Cowork if you have a bigger project, or if you're trying to do thousands of documents, maybe you want to be getting into a code interface and using Python for that. So the answer, I think, is in logic, not too different. You're trying to extract key themes, but in practice, the tool that you're using is quite different, which then means you need to finesse it slightly differently from how you were doing there. Yeah, let us know if that's answered the question, if you'd like us to go into more detail there. But what I'd like to just cover quickly on this slide is this idea of embedding this expertise. So we've been saying to you during this case study, you can do this, you can enable yourself, you can do what you think at scale, but then you get additional complication when trying to do that. And so I've said on the previous slide, vetted equivalent list is better than just Control F for green capex. So you get these ideas like in Tesco, where it's something like what you're looking for, but not exactly those words. But then the obvious follow-up question is, well, what does count? And so what we did find for Tesco is here, references to carbon price. They say that they have an internal carbon price. So imagine another report that just says, hey, I doesn't say anything about solar, EV, any of this stuff on the right. It only says I have an internal carbon price. That doesn't pass my test. It's using the word carbon. So if we're just going pure semantic similarity, green, carbon, transition, yeah, sure, maybe they're all the same. But carbon price is different. Carbon price is not green capex in my view and in my experience. And so a pure anything that is like green does not work, right? So then you maybe get to stuff here. So what we've got on the slide right now is extracts of stuff we did find in Tesco's report. So there's a solar PPA, heat pumps, investments in an EV fleet. That's all green capex, calling it something else. And so the general rule here is something about infrastructure investment in electrification, in transition, something like that. And so there's a process of iteration, which generally we use AI to help us with, to then say, what do we get to? Where do we get to? Continue to define and narrow down until we have a very good comprehensive rule which says, this is what I mean when I say in green capex. And I'll just round out by zooming out again and taking us through the entire thing, and I'll pause again. So what we've been discussing is, how do you enable yourself? How do you do your analysis at scale? What we're saying with this case study is it's not so simple as just asking AI, find green capex. What we're saying is, if you're going to do that, and if you want to get answers you can trust, you really need to define what you're looking for. And it's questions like this, trying to get that instinct, trying to articulate your instinct is essentially what needs to happen in order to do this at scale and get outputs that you can rely on. Great. Let me pause again. See thoughts, reflections, questions, comments. And now we know that the chat function works, guys. So if there are any others, I'll be looking for them. Giving people a second to reflect on any questions they may have. Great. So now what we're going to do, that was our first case study, our first kind of idea, practical application. And what we were looking at is, how do you embed your brain with AI? We're now going to take quite a different use case. Thanks, Robin. Good to know. Good to know. It's nice and clear. Great. We're now going to take quite a different tack, and we're going to talk about some more of the technical aspects of this. I'm going to hand over to Joe in a second, but let me just set the scene a little bit. So earlier, we were chatting about AI agents. It was one of the terms that Alakhan introduced to us as we were going. And the key thing was, well, my takeaway from it was, it's a whole new ball game in a way. It is tools that can use their own tools, essentially. And so that quickly becomes quite technical and complicated. And we're going to do our best to disaggregate some of that and set out for you what this looks like. But yeah, again, please do feel free to stop us. With that, I'll bring up your slides, Joe. Should I go over here?
No, let's start with the title slide, actually. Thanks, Fish. Hey, nice to meet you all. The fan in this room has just died, so you get to slowly watch me melt as I present this. I'm going to talk about agent orchestration for physical asset discovery. lot of words, but effectively the point of this section is to sort of extrapolate what Alakhan and Vish have been talking about, to sort of get beyond the way we may be using AI now and look at what's going to become an industry standard in the next couple of years. So I'm going to talk about AI agents. I'm going to go back over that in a bit more detail. Then I'm going to talk about orchestration, which is how we can get these agents to speak to each other. And to do that, I'm going to present it through the sort of lens of a problem we faced during our physical climate risk analysis process, and then how we solved it. So let's go to the next slide-ish. Okay, so we do climate physical risk analysis at Cambry. What that involves is effectively taking a company, finding every single physical asset that is held by that company. It might be data centers, warehouses, offices, so on, so on. We then map that against open source physical hazard data sets, and then we draw meaning from that. We try and ascribe sort of a value of climate physical risk. How is this asset exposed? Like, what's the potential loss there? We also do site level narratives, so figuring out how are they exposed in terms of flood revetments. If there's a wildfire, how close is the foliage? It's very granular and very noisy data. But I think let's start with the question now. Let's go to the next slide. This we asked in person at London Climate Action Week, and I'm not going to ask you guys now, but we discussed for a little while. And if you wanted to locate every physical asset utilized by a company, how would you do it? There were a few suggestions. A lot of people said sort of just Google it, which broadly is not a bad approach. But I think what we settled on in a dream scenario before AI, say 5 years ago, is delegation. If you have a desk of analysts, you'd set one analyst on looking specifically through the maps on a website. You'd have another analyst looking through SEC filings, so on and so forth. You'd have different specializations, and then you'd have someone talking to all of these people who brings the data in together at the end, who compresses it, removes duplicates, refines. And that brings us to the idea of an AI agent, this concept of delegation. So if we go to the next slide, Vish. An AI agent is very similar to the chatbots that you use every day. You get a query, you put it in, you get a response that comes out. But as Alakhan was saying earlier, the difference between an agent and a chatbot is that it's running in this loop. So it takes an answer and it doesn't just spit it out back to you straight away. It evaluates the answer. It says, what's missing from this? I've got this objective that I want to achieve. What needs to be added to this answer? What's wrong with this answer? Before it's complete enough to give back to the user. So it puts it back into this loop and iterates and iterates. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, you can give these agents different contexts in terms of this is the type of agent that you are. This is your job. This is what you're supposed to do. And you can give them tools. You can equip them with different sort of abilities to search the web, to read certain filings, look in certain sections of a proxy statement, whatever, whether it's crawling through a map on a website. You can give these agents the ability to do that so that with every iteration, they have more power to edit their previous answer, to add to their previous answer, until eventually they arrive at this output that they can give to you. I'll pause for a second there because it's a bit of a weird distinction. So hands up, no stupid questions, if everyone's kind of clear on what an AI agent is and how it differs.
Yeah, and I can give my layman's interpretation while people think if they have any reflections on that. I like the term orchestration, and I like the metaphor of the interns. I like the idea of you're setting people. So you're basically setting, it would be like setting several people, several tasks, and then managing the interaction between them and managing the output of that. Is that basically what it is? You equip them all to do their own task, and you get them to specialize in what they're doing. Then you roll that up, and that's essentially how you best work with agents. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think we're not quite to the sort of orchestration step yet. That's sort of the next slide. I think the best way to understand an agent is just as one analyst, one intern, right? They're specialized at one specific thing. You've given them the tools, you've given them the context, and you can send them away and they're going to go and read 1,000 filings and give you the outputs. That's one employee. What we're going to come to next is the orchestration layer, which is having them all on one desk, having them speak to each other, having them sort of resolve any conflict.
Yeah, so it's having a little guy to help you, and that you invest in learning, in teaching how best to do it.
Pretty much.
That's clear to me, guys. In the chat, let us know if there's anything else.
Okay, so let's torture this metaphor of a desk of analysts a little further. when they're all speaking to each other, you have your specialists that we've talked about. They're reading filings, they're reading maps, they're searching the web. You have someone who coordinates them, who looks at the sort of problem and says, which one of these agents is best suited to solve this problem? And they delegate the work like that. You have a critic whose role is effectively to audit the output. They sit outside of the loop. So once an output is decided on and coordinated and collated, it's sent to this critic agent whose sole job is to look through the output and say, does it match up with what the user or the human wants to see? And all of these can be put in different setups, different layouts, depending on what you want to achieve. But the idea is that they loop over and over again until the output looks like what the human wants. And this can happen on your computer overnight. It can happen on a server somewhere in like North America somewhere. That's generally how we tend to do it. But the idea is it's autonomous. It runs without you having to iterate. You can program that in. You can have a human in the loop, which is a sort of buzzy term at the moment for a way to monitor AI output to make sure your governance is good. But broadly speaking, this happens behind the scenes within the computer, within Silicon. I'll pause quickly again because these are advanced sort of concepts from what we were chatting about earlier. And then I'll talk about how we used orchestration to solve that physical risk problem from earlier.
Yeah,
I'll give it
I have a question, actually, Joe / Alakan, both of you. So could you explain to us, so tools like Claude Cowork versus doing stuff in a Python ecosystem with APIs, can you connect that to the agent thing? So is Claude Cowork using agents, and or do you need to be in another more technical ecosystem in order to use agents?
Yeah, and Alakan touched on this earlier. Claude Cowork is an agent. And they're selling it to you out of the box as an agent. And it's this sort of evolution from just a straight call and response from an LLM to something that already has this pre-built code scaffold around it. All we're doing here is building a different code scaffold. We're using code called Python. It's just computer code, which basically feeds inputs from one LLM to another. We're just building our own version of Cowork, which is specifically suited to this one task. I don't know how well I've articulated that, so I might let you have a go, Alakan.
No, I think that really sums it up, because it's like all the different providers now, like Copilot has its own version of like some agents that they've introduced now. We're not really as familiar with Copilot because we don't really use it as much, but we've like, at least what we hear a lot from the clients and like in general, people who talk to during this kind of webinars is that, yeah, like they've tried this kind of agents, but then I think that people don't quite, like people really give up easily on things where it's like they tried this Copilot agent and it didn't quite do their job, and they're like, well, AI is useless basically. But like, yeah, it's really tailorable and you can build everything around it, and like different level, like types of orchestrations and things like that. I think Joe is gonna talk through a bit more of like the kind of specific framework and system that you can build around like your particular use case. But yeah, Vish, to your point, this is sort of on a bit more of a technical level of like you actually build it. It's you can't really do it out of the box like that, if you know what I mean. Like it's really hard to build a system like that in like Cowork, but Claude Code, actually, and things like that.
Great, thanks guys. I think let's definitely take 30 seconds, just let this sit for people, see what's coming out as a bit unclear, and then we'll go into the physical assets case study. Because if you're confused, you're going to be more confused, guys. But we'll hold your hand through it. So yeah, we'll give everyone just a minute to reflect, and then we'll carry on. All right, I think people are ready. I think people are happy to chat further about physical risk. All right, I'll bring your slides back up.
Okay, so we've talked about agents, we've talked about orchestration. How about putting these agents in a sort of connected framework where they can speak to each other, where they can organize amongst themselves to achieve a certain goal? And we talked a little bit about that problem case, which was physical risk, finding every possible asset for a company, starting with just the company name or a ticker. This is a sort of abstracted flowchart. It's a little bit simplified of the solution we ended up at using agent orchestration for physical asset discovery. So you start with your company name on the far left. You then have some very simple agents, low parameters. We want to save, when I say parameters, what I mean by that is effectively a model that isn't at the frontier. They're all very expensive. You hear a new headline every 5 seconds about someone spending, some big institution spending 500 million on Claude tokens, right? We want to use the right size model for the right function. So we use a slow, simple model for slow, simple tasks. And that is splitting this company into subsidiaries, brands, any joint ventures, anything that could catch us out. You know, if they have loads of warehouses held under a different name, that's the first step. That's then fed into a coordinator, an agent coordinator who effectively looks at these company names, looks at the company websites, assesses what needs to be pulled and kind of what we're expecting as well. It sort of generates a prediction of what we're trying to pull, what we're trying to look for. It then, based on that prediction, distributes its requests to a series of agents. And I feel like we've gone over this a little bit now, but there's a filings agent, there's a registry agent, there's one that does sort of long form. If you've ever used deep research in Copilot or Claude, it does that. It also, one that's the most sort of profitable, that yields the most, that's the mapping agent. These are all agents equipped with specific tools to achieve specific goals, to pull data from specific places. They all run in parallel. It's like having individual people running an equivalent of Copilot, ChatGPT. It's like having a chat window open, but there's a person managing it. That all runs in parallel. And then onto this next section, all of the data is dumped into one place, and we have an AI agent whose job it is to merge it all, deduplicate, resolve any conflicts between what all of these sort of previous agents, these previous specialists have told them. We then have a critic loop, and you can see that winding back over the top there. That evaluates the data sets that's been spat out against what we're expecting to see. It looks for errors, it traces the reasoning, it checks the evidence. You know, how resilient is this data? Can I put it in front of the board, to use Vish's word? This loop runs forever until that critic is happy, and then it spits out a verified asset list, and that lands on my computer, and I look through it and I compare it to whatever we've done with humans before. That's been an important part of our process, comparing human outputs to AI outputs. And what we're finding now is that this agentic search is actually way, way better than we were ever able to do before we had this capacity. Humans aren't consistent enough. They aren't persistent enough. You know, this is a very high scope and high time horizon job, and it's something we can now achieve effectively overnight. I've talked for a long time, and there's a lot of different blocks in this flowchart, so I'm going to pause again. Do put a hand up, no stupid questions at all.
Yeah, I would think that maybe like it's a lot, and so maybe if we and it's also really abstract, I think, for people who are not doing coding. So like Vish, like maybe from your perspective of like maybe you could talk through about how you do but like similar kind of stuff, but breaking it down into like multiple chats in like Claude, and like how do you achieve the similar kind of like how do you use the similar kind of orchestration logic without it actually being controlled by this controller agent, but like if you are the controller essentially?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And basically what I do is I'm prompting at each stage after each of these. So I need to do kind of an individual prompt, or maybe I'd batch these three, for example. But it's essentially I'm reviewing at each stage, and then I'm asking either in chat or in Claude Cowork, I'm then saying, all right, cool. My next step is I want to go out and I want to look for. So essentially it's that idea. And this is, I think, what's interesting about the way we tend to work together at Cambry is institutionalizing that process. So if I did this 5 times, say for 5 different companies, and then we had a bunch of learnings about what works and what works less so during that process, we would then scale that up using agents. So I guess the short answer to your question, Alakana, is what I would follow pretty much exactly the same process, because these are the steps you would need to take in order to find the locations. It's just at each point I'm stopping and reviewing and making sure I'm comfortable to then go into the next step. But you can also do that using agents by using agents to challenge agents. So yeah, pretty much the same stuff.
We just had a question from Omar there, which was difference between web agent and web research agent. And that is on me because that is not particularly clear on this slide. So I think the website agent is specific to the company website, right? It's looking through, do they have a careers page? It's crawling through every single piece of text on that website to figure out, are there any clues to their physical assets? Whereas web research is looking beyond the company website. It's, it's the equivalent of a sort of very advanced Google search. It's looking, are there news articles? Are there any weird sort of third-party data sets that we weren't aware of? Has anyone listed these physical assets somewhere other than the original company website? Does that sort of answer the question?
I think so.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think there was a
Okay.
floating thumb up somewhere there.
All right.
Great.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm going to give my 30-second summary as well of what you guys have said here. So starting with agents are kind of a newer thing. They're kind of like having an agent is kind of like having an employee that I can set to a task, and I can give them an objective and they can figure out what they need to do in order to get to that objective. I can now also, through this idea of orchestration, have a team that I work with. Well, they work with each other and they check each other's work, and someone is specialized to do this other thing. And I can orchestrate all of this, and I can create my own way of doing that through code. And there are also tools such as Claude Cowork, which are basically doing that, but with less specialized to a specific use case. Is that right? Did I get that right? Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Joe, maybe you could confirm that, but it's like, yeah, from my side, yeah, I think that you summed it up pretty well.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good summary.
And if anyone has follow-up questions after this as well. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing a question in the chat. If anyone has follow-ups, please do feel free to reach out to us as well. Can all agentic AI tools do this process or specific to Claude Cowork? Yes?
So this process in particular, which I was kind of trying to articulate earlier, is something we've built. This is our version of Claude Cowork. We've taken what is the raw sort of thinking engine, the ability to generate a judgment, generate an output, use a tool, and we've built our own infrastructure around it using computer code. What Claude Cowork is something out of the box that effectively operates as, I don't know, like an executive assistant. It's built just to generally help you out, whereas ours would be useless trying to do what Claude Cowork does. This is built specifically to find physical assets, whereas Claude Cowork is a generalist. It's just supposed to help you with work in general. So to build something like this, you need that coding element. You need to be able to build the code scaffold. So I think the answer to your question is probably no.
And this is a great lead in actually to what we're going to chat about next, which is the stuff you need to keep in mind while building this sort of stuff. So that's also what we're going to, that's also what we're going to cover. So if you're trying to build some of this stuff, and the reason you would do this, hopefully is clear, but to make it, to articulate it clearly, is to address that problem we had at the start where you wouldn't trust it enough to put it in front of the board, right? Because you don't really know what's happening under the hood. You're kind of like, hey, it gave me some locations. I don't know where it got it. Doing this process, you know exactly where everything is coming in. And what we haven't put into this diagram is the human in the loop stages. So where do we check it and how do we check it? And it's because we've designed this process and we've been so iterative in designing it. We now, I think it was like, we checked our work against a data set that one of our clients had. And I think it was like a 90 something percent accuracy, 95, 97, something like that, which we are, because of the robustness of this process, able to get analysis that we can really stand behind when we're doing it. And so, yeah, I think let's go into, and I'll hand over to you, Alakhan, just some thoughts around how we've been going about doing this, lessons we've learned over the last few years doing this. And yeah, we'll pause again after that for any further reflections from people.
Yeah, cool, thanks. I mean, you can probably hear my nose getting more blocked and blocked with hay fever throughout this presentation, but like, yeah, I'll try my best. Essentially, yeah, like in terms of, so we're trying to cover two things, like how, like, I think we're trying to give you some food for thought in terms of how you can actually use AI at a larger scale if you, for example, had if you have a technical team in your company, or but also at the same time enable you to sort of think that like the kind of orchestration and multiple like agents and the system that Joe has described is only that useful because we want to do it at a huge scale. Because if you want to do it at like 2 companies, there is no need for you to spend like days and weeks trying to build a system. And it is something that is like somewhat achievable now using just like for just normal Claude chat. And like Vish said, like you would create multiple chats and here I want to just touch upon like multiple things. So the first point about like, and one of the key learnings about the accuracy is that AI is, and like Joe touched upon this, there are like multiple points that really enable AI to get to a good, like this 90% plus accuracy kind of scenario. And it's one of them, Vish, if you go to the next slide, let me just check that. Yeah, so one of this is context, is about bringing that information to the model. But even before like getting all the right information, and even before we get to that, like there are these really simple things that you can do to improve essentially the accuracy of AI. And it's things like you should ask AI always to, like if you feed it a PDF, you could genuinely just ask it to produce a page or like a quote and like the paragraph that it has used in order to come to its answer, basically to come to its conclusion. And this kind of things are really trivial, but they are quite efficient in terms of like being able to trust the output more. It's a lot about using a very detailed prompt, but also using it consistently across, for example, if you want to do the same thing for another company, is being able to control the like the kind of text that you're giving it, the kind of prompts. And I think the bigger part of it is also, especially when you try to scale it, and I think if we could go to the next slide, is around the infrastructure. And is that thing that we're saying that if you want to do it on a scale of like thousands of companies, the problem is not like the model itself is the same as you would use in like your ChatGPT. It's just what we're able to do. A lot of the things that you need to control there is like you actually need to store, for example, all of these annual reports, sustainability reports somewhere. You also need to feed exactly the same document types, for example, for different companies, and control the, like we're saying here, like prompt libraries. Essentially, like we would build, I think Vish has touched upon like codifying this intelligence and like these frameworks around how to actually do this assessment and building this out first. And I think in general, AI is really forcing us to shift how we approach tasks. Like you have to do so much upfront, so much thinking upfront, like planning ahead and actually systemizing and writing down the plan every step of the way of how you would do it so that AI can actually repeat it. And yeah, so I think I've said a lot here. Maybe Vish, we could have a bit more of a discussion with you, like if you have any questions around here, or like do a recap.
Yeah, let me play that back to you. So I think what you said, I like this framing. So there's 3 things to keep in mind when trying to do this analysis at scale: accuracy, consistency, and infrastructure. So accuracy being like, do you get the right answer, what you would consider to be the right answer? Consistency being, do you get the same answer when you ask the same question twice? And infrastructure is all of that stuff that was the waterline that we'll come to in a second. So the pitfalls that you pulled out here seem to me to speak to points 1 and 2, accuracy and consistency. So conflating retrieval with interpretation. Yeah, so I think the idea here is just because it can find a number does not mean that it's the right kind of number for what you were thinking about. And that speaks to the vetted equivalence point that we were talking about earlier, right? Just because it's finding something, is it the right sort of something? And then here are a couple of the other ones: treating consistency as a given, assuming it'll do the same thing twice. That is not how these models work. And I think that is really, now we would get, if we went into that, we'd get really deeply technical, but let's just say for now that they're probabilistic. And so that's not how they work. They're not designed necessarily to give you the exact same answer, but there's ways to solve for consistency. There are ways in the processes. And then there's a couple of others around hallucinated citations. Be careful about that. And skipping calibration. And I think the last thing I'll say from my playback to you to make sure I've understood it is this stuff seems to me to be completely different from the normal conversation around AI. I think a lot of stuff when people are using Copilot, it's kind of about this. It's saying, how good is Copilot? What are the answers? And what we're saying is doing this at scale. This is the kind of stuff that you really need to think about. And it's in some ways less fun, like less gregarious, less oh yeah, document sourcing. Where are we storing the documents? What's the version of sources? What is in the prompt library? But this is the infrastructure that then gives you the accuracy and the consistency that then means that you can report to the board and feel comfortable with what you're saying. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I don't know if Joe, you have something to add, but like, I think, yeah, it's like working with AI nowadays is like, and I think people really misunderstand it, that it's way less about the model's capability, because the models, the frontier models now, especially, they are so good now. If you can actually explain all of the things that it needs to do, have this framework thinking, and have this like the correct documents fed to it, and like break the task into multiple steps and things like that. So I think, yeah, you're spot on with the recap, I think.
Right.
I think
Let's pause
one
again.
point
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
worth mentioning, I think you guys have covered it well, but is the sort of sycophancy element of these models. These models want to sort of please you, so to speak. They're going to give you an output that looks amazing. And this is true wherever you are in your sort of AI journey, to use a horrible corporate term. It doesn't matter whether you're just experimenting with putting things into Copilot and getting stuff out, or if you're actually starting to use it with code. Every output from this model is trying to predict what you want. So you have to be so specific and so strict with these models in restricting what they're actually trying to tell you and what they can't tell you, what doesn't count as a good answer. That all lives in the prompting. And this is all stuff you can learn about, you can take away. There's a million guides on LinkedIn, some better than others. And that'll work 10 times. You know, if you're putting these extensive prompts in and they're very explanatory to the model, you'll get good outputs out 10 times, maybe 100 times. If you want to do it 1,000 times, that's when what we've been talking about more towards the end of this comes in. It's the coding scaffolds, it's audit trails, it's having maybe separate audit agents that go back through each line of reasoning, each body of evidence, and check, was the reasoning made by this first model correct? It's that sort of thing that is essential at scale, but isn't necessarily as relevant when you're just stepping out. Yeah, that's all from me.
Amazing. Thanks, Joe. I think, yeah, I want to give people a minute again to sit and breathe and reflect. And after we've done that, and if there are any questions, we'll address those. And then I'll go back through and just set out what we discussed today and what the takeaways are. And then we can wrap it up there. So yeah, 30 seconds, everyone. Sit and think and reflect. If there's any questions we can help with now, please do let us know. Perfect. Yay. Thanks, Robin. Any advice on playgrounds to go away and test what you've told us for free/low cost? And then second question, kind of related, best way to get started with building this AI agent workflow. What do you guys think?
Do you want to go, Alakan, or should I?
You could go first.
Okay, I'd say best place to start for a playground and for cheap. This is what I recommend to my friends who are not in the industry at all, never really use AI. I just say spend 20 quid on Claude and ask it some pretty big picture questions and see what it can do. Even just in a regular chat window, even in Cowork, which is the sort of agent version of the chat window, it's incredibly impressive. And if you haven't really gotten too deep into AI, it might freak you out a little bit, just how effective it is at sort of answering your questions. So I'd say start with Claude. Having done that, there's some, if you want to really look into how the models work and sort of do some parallel testing, you can maybe look at Google AI Studio. That's something we do a little bit of, and that lets you dig a little bit further into how these models actually think, how they work. Yeah, that would be my answer. Would you agree, Alakan? I don't know.
Yeah, like I think, I mean, there are two parts of it, right? Like you can use Claude, like if you haven't been able, for example, to try Claude Cowork and things like that, like Claude Code maybe, but primarily if you're not technical, then like Claude Cowork. But if you are talking more about best way to do like a playground for like building an AI agent workflow, I think there is another question by Alice around this, and I think it's a bit hard for me to say given that we just coded, but I know that people use things like Crew AI and like N8N, and that have more like this kind of back like graphical user interfaces where you can just like drag and drop like this different like create a mini agent and like write in a description. So I would say try things like that, but like I think the key thing is just like the before you even get to like building this agent workflows is to get into this mentality of like you have a bunch of things that you like a big task that you need to do is to break it down and have a first chat with one Claude session where you just ask it to like list the subsidiaries of the company. Then you go into another chat and like and things like that, like do this chain stepping because you'll be a bit overwhelming to like go into like start actually building this orchestration layers and things like that.
I
Essentially,
think
Yeah,
I don't know if
I've
that
definitely been
really
guilty of
answers.
that in the past, of sort of running before I could walk. The AI sort of industry is moving so fast. I mean, in the space of a year, everything has changed almost completely. So it's very tempting to try and start at the end, instead of just building up, like Alakhan said. I've been victim of that in the past, but it is really worth just focusing on one chat, then one agent, then maybe two agents speaking to each other, and then you can build out into a web. So yeah, I'd say take your time because it is worth it.
yeah, I agree. My reading of what you guys are saying, there's two things that we would get started with. Number one, play out what you want the workflow to look like. And so that's the points that we were talking about here, both in the, well, what do you want what each agent to do? But then to our first case study, what do you want the answers to look like? And really trying to think through what are you trying to get at each point would be item number one. And then item number two, yeah, is try try not to be scared. I had never coded a day in my life before last year. And then again with Claude Code, it's an accessibility thing. There's a way. I have asked Claude the dumbest questions you could. I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. Take me from the beginning. And Claude is brilliant at doing that. So yeah, we agree. Thanks, Alakhan, for popping that in the chat. So yeah, my two things are, and it's echoing what Joe and Alakhan have just said. Think through the workflow. Think about the objectives and what good looks like, which is you will know that because that's your own expertise. And then item number two, give it a go. See what happens, see what you don't like, and then iterate from there. I'll give another 30 seconds for any other questions, and then I'll just wrap up and we can give people some time back. Love to give people time back. Great. As we said at the top, please feel free to reach out to any of us if there are further questions that come up as you're thinking about this stuff. So yeah, in summary, what do we do today? We have set kind of technical ground. So you should hopefully know what all the terms around all of this are. What's the difference between Gen AI and LLMs and agents? We spent quite a bit of time with agents again. So we set out the terms. We then went into a couple of case studies, one around kind of embodying and codifying your expertise for the agents or AI to use. The second one around this idea of AI and agent orchestration and where you can go from here. And then at the end, what we touched on is, well, what do you need to do in practice? And it was these three pillars that we talk about of accuracy, consistency, and infrastructure. And that's where the work really is. It's not in the asking the model, it's in the solving for accuracy, consistency, and infrastructure. Great. So what I said at the start was our objectives were hopefully, oh, and I'm going to get the hands up thing again, actually. So I said that there were two objectives. There was number one, do you have some ideas about how you could use AI in your own work? Could you raise your hand, please, if you have some ideas of what you could do? I've raised, got Omar, great, perfect. Yeah, amazing. And then, perfect. I'm seeing lots of great hands. And then my second objective, which keep your hands raised if you have an idea of where to get started. We're not expecting anyone to have solved it all, but you have ideas, you know where you have some things to play with. We're going forward. And I'm still seeing probably just as many hands, which makes me feel very happy. Great. Cool. That sounds great. Alakhan, Joe, any last thoughts from you guys? Anything you'd like to end on?
No, I think we've covered it. Although maybe that note, just try different models, try and play in different environments, have a go with that crew agent builder Alakam was talking about. Try Cowork, maybe try Claude Code. It's not as intimidating as it looks. Yeah, that's my footnote.
I feel like the problem is a lot of people have the constraints around like their company constraints around the kind of models that they're allowed to use or like kind of software and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it would be like try it at least personally, and just to have an idea because it's like I feel like it's just don't just get your hands dirty and like play around and it's amazing.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Oh, I've seen one last question in here, which seems interesting. What is your advice for a line to counter the AI impact environment line? We could have a whole conversation about this, Robin. So it all depends on context and how big, what your comparator is, what's your counterfactual. And so I'll give you a 20-second example of what we say. One of our projects that we work on is about identifying the companies that are most harmful on deforestation. So the ones doing the worst impact, and they're also the ones lobbying against policies that improve deforestation. Previously, doing this kind of project would take about a year to look at the reports that the company had published, for human analysts to go through, to then create a framework, a taxonomy, to then get to the end, to then say, to start the engagement process of saying, you guys are the ones that are causing this great harm. With AI, you can condense that year into about 2 months, if not less, depending on the work you've done. And so then you can do the value add work, which is addressing the deforestation. And so AI is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used well or it could be used badly. And I think there is room for reasonable and responsible AI. And I'm really thrilled by the conversations around AI governance and responsible AI that we're seeing. But our short answer is basically that there can be really good uses that actually are in service of the environment if it is used correctly. Joe Alakan, what do you guys think?
I think there's another answer to this, which talks to the orchestration thing I was on about earlier. Building these webs of agents and knowing when to route to different models. I think it's broadly our opinion that AI, because it's so efficient and so good at its job, is going to become inevitable. So as Vish said, learning to use that tool right. So routing a certain question to a cheaper model that's not as inefficient, routing more complex questions to frontier models, and knowing when not to use AI at all is really important, and orchestration plays into that massively. So just speaking to my section, I think it's going to become pretty much the industry standard in the next couple of years. Alakan?
I would also maybe just last point. I mean, it's very controversial, but like the data around the water usage and like the electricity usage and things like that of the data centers and of like it's so ambiguous, but it's also because it's changing so fast. Like the latest Google like data centers and things like that, they and like Microsoft building new data centers, they are getting so optimized in terms of the usage of water and like reusing it for like the cooling of the data centers and things like that. Like that, I think like in 5 years time, it's going to be like AI usage is going to be such a commodity that they will optimize for it so quickly compared to like, I mean, it took us ages to now start this transition to using like electric cars from like burning fossil fuels for that. But like data centers and AI is going to be way less impactful on environment. That's just my personal non-Cambry take.
Yeah, Alakan says that as himself.
Yeah.
Omar, is that a question? I see your hand raised. Should I try to unmute you? Or no? I will try. Oh
I think
no,
that might be training that.
Oh, it's just from before. Great. Cool. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, everyone. We will reach out with the slides from this conversation. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we would be thrilled to. Let us know if there are any questions. We continue to host a bunch of events like this. If you follow Cambry's page on LinkedIn, we do events just on AI, we do ones just on climate. Whatever your interest is, just give us a follow and let us know. But with that, I think I will just say thank you all for your time and hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Yeah, we have an in-person like event on AI as well, like next week. If And if you're interested, it's on the Canberry.io/events, I guess.
Perfect.
Very
Thanks, guys.
commercial, but okay, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.